Sawadee-kap, hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're finishing up Volume 8, which is The Foremost Householder. We're going to be studying chapters 31 through 41. This will complete this book so that then we'll be starting a new book next week, which is The Six Sense Spaces. That's Volume 9. So we'll talk about that book when we actually get to it. But for today, we're going to be finishing up Volume 8. And the way that we do this particular program is I invite students who are in Zoom to be able to volunteer to read a chapter. After a student reads a chapter, then I'll share some teachings on that for a few minutes. Then I'm going to open up to any and all questions that students have, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. This is a program that you'll tend to move into when you have already studied foundational teachings. So if you'd like to read and you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and let me know that. Then for those of you guys that are interested in asking questions, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section, and I'll be able to see that. Or in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and then unmute your microphone and ask any and all questions that you like. So it looks like Pat's volunteering to read this first one. So if you'd like to go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Even more fruitful than giving. If, householder, one gives alms, rough or excellent, and one gives disrespectfully, gives inconsiderately, does not give with one's own hand, gives what would be discarded, gives without a view of future consequences, then wherever the result of that gift is produced for one's mind does not incline towards the enjoyment of superb food, nor toward the enjoyment of superb clothing, nor toward the enjoyment of superb vehicles, nor toward the enjoyment of whatever is superb among the five objects of sensual pleasure. Also, one's children and wives, and one's slaves, servants, and workers do not want to listen to one, do not lend an ear, and do not apply their minds to understand. For what reason? Just this is the result of actions that are done disrespectfully. If, householder, one gives alms, whether rough or excellent, and one gives respectfully, gives considerately, gives with one's own hand, gives what would not be discarded, gives with the view of future consequences, then wherever the result of that gift is produced for one's mind inclines toward the enjoyment of superb food, toward the enjoyment of superb clothing, toward the enjoyment of superb vehicles, towards the enjoyment of whatever is superb among the five objects of sensual pleasure. Also, one's children and wives, and one's slaves, servants, and workers want to listen to one, lend an ear, and apply their minds to understand. For what reason? Just this is the result of actions that are done respectfully. In the past householder, there was a Brahmin named Valama. He gave such a great alms offering as this: 84,000 golden bowls filled with silver, 84,000 bowls filled with gold, 84,000 bronze bowls filled with bullion, 84,000 elephants with golden ornaments, golden banners covered with nets of golden thread, 84,000 chariots with upholstery of lion skins, tiger skins, leopard skins, and saffron-dyed blankets with golden ornaments, golden banners covered with nets of gold thread, 84,000 milk cows with jute tethers and bronze pails, 84,000 maidens adorned with bejeweled earrings, 84,000 couches spread with rugs, blankets, and covers, with excellent coverings of antelope hide, with canopies and red bolsters at both ends, 84,000 coatis of cloth made of fine linen, fine silk, fine wool, and fine cotton. How much more of food and drink, snacks, meals, refreshments, and beverages? It seemed to be flowing like rivers. You might think, householder, he was someone else, the Brahmin Valama, who on that occasion gave that great alms offering. But you should not look at it in such a way. I myself was Brahmin Valama, who on that occasion gave that great alms offering. Now, householder, at that alms offering, there was no one worthy of offerings, no one who purified the offering. Even more fruitful than the great alms offering that the Brahmin Valama gave would it be would it be to feed one person accomplished in view? Even more fruitful than the great alms offering that the Brahmin Valama gave and feeding 100 persons accomplished in view, would it be to feed one once returner? Even more fruitful than the great alms offering that the Brahmin Valama gave and feeding 100 once returners, would it be to feed one non-returner? Even more fruitful than the great alms offering that the Brahmin Valama gave and feeding 100 non-returners, would it be to feed one arahant? Even more fruitful than the great alms offering that the Brahmin Valama gave and feeding 100 arahants, would it be to feed one Paseka Buddha? Even more fruitful than the great alms offering that the Brahmin Valama gave and feeding 100 Paseka Buddhas, would it be to feed the Tathagata, the Arahant, the perfectly enlightened one? Would it be to feed the community of monks headed by the Buddha? Would it be to build a dwelling dedicated to the community of the four quarters? Would it be for one with a mind of confidence to go to refuge to the Buddha, the teachings, and the community? Would it be for one with a mind of confidence to undertake the 5 training precepts, to abstain from the destruction of life, to abstain from taking what is not given, to abstain from sexual misconduct, to abstain from false speech, to abstain from liquor, wine, and intoxicants, the basis for heedlessness? As great as all this might be, it would be even more fruitful if one would develop a mind of loving kindness, even for the time it takes to pull a cow's udder. As great as all this might be, it would be even more fruitful if one would develop the perception of impermanence just for the time of a finger snap. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So here, this is the Buddha talking at the beginning about someone who hasn't really thought through the offering that they provide to ordained practitioners or Brahmin or anybody that they might be making an offering to. And for someone who hasn't really put thought into what it is that they're doing in terms of their practice of generosity, the Buddha is showing you this cause and effect that an individual like that, they wouldn't have individuals who are willing to listen to them, right? Because if you're not being very thoughtful and respectful in the way that you're putting together an offering, then you're not being thoughtful and respectful in other parts of your life as well. So therefore, the cause and effect of the natural law of karma is that one's children or life partner and employees and people like this aren't interested in listening to that person because they're not really thoughtful about the way that they interact with others, including when they're practicing generosity. But when someone's practicing generosity in a thoughtful way and they've thought through the type of offerings that they're going to make and what that means and how they're going to do that, then that means they're very thoughtful in their relationships as well with their children, their life partner, their employees, and people of this nature. So therefore, those individuals would be interested to listen to them. So here, the takeaway from this is to be thoughtful about any type of offering that you're making. And I've shared this at different times about how it's unwise to just crave and practice generosity extensively, but being on the other side where you're maybe selfish and not sharing at all, that wouldn't lead to any peace and joy either, because practicing generosity is what trains the mind to let go and eliminate craving, desire, attachment. So there's a middle way, even with your generosity, and you need to find what that middle is. And part of that is to be giving thought and consideration to any type of offering that you might be offering someone. So the Buddha then talks about this individual who's a Brahmin who gave this enormous offering of material possessions. And ultimately, he describes this enormous, elaborate offering. Here you can see all the details. Pat read those for you. And then ultimately, he shares that he was this individual. So in a past life, it was him that was actually making this offering of all these material things. And he said at the time that he made that offering, there was no person that was worthy of that offering, meaning that there wasn't anybody who was free of craving, anger, and ignorance, or practicing for the removal of craving, anger, and ignorance, because that's one who would be able to purify that offering. So the Buddha says that, okay, that enormous offering, as great as it was, it would be even better that instead you just feed one person who's accomplished in view. And this person would essentially be in the first stage of enlightenment. And there's details that I share about what it means to have accomplishment in view. And the reason why this is beneficial is it's not anything mystical or magical. It's that if you're coming in contact with someone who's accomplished in view and you have not yet accomplished that, that gives you an opportunity to cultivate wisdom to understand how to do that. Because part of accomplishment in view is establishing right view in the Four Noble Truths, where you understand what is the problem, the cause, the elimination, and the path forward. If you can understand that and you can have this real breakthrough to understanding what's causing your discontent feelings, then you can potentially make your way to enlightenment in this lifetime. So while that enormous material gifts that the Buddha talked about there is quite an amazing offering, it would be even more fruitful to just feed one person who is accomplished in view, because that would allow you to then cultivate the wisdom of that. And then the Buddha goes through the second, the third, and ultimately the fourth stage of enlightenment, saying, yes, if you made offerings to these people, it would actually increase the fruitfulness of the offering that you're making. Because again, there's nothing mystical or magical. It's that you're able to cultivate wisdom from those people of how they actually got into that first, second, third, or fourth stage of enlightenment, where the mind is actually enlightened. Then the Buddha talks about this other individual here, which I've never met one of these, but this is apparently something that the Buddha was aware of, which is an individual who would be able to get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides, but they don't actually share their teachings. This is oftentimes pronounced many different ways. I pronounce it Pakya Buddha, but there's many different ways that people will pronounce that. This is an individual who's gotten to enlightenment without the help of any teachers or guides, but they don't actually share their teachings with anybody. They just get to enlightenment on their own. So again, it would be very helpful to be able to learn from an individual like that. But then the Buddha ultimately says, okay, to feed an actual Buddha, a Tathagata, a perfectly enlightened one, this is a very high quality of wholesome karma that you're generating, because again, you're able to cultivate wisdom about how to actually get to enlightenment. Then he goes through some other types of individuals, like the entire community or building, a building for the community, and he goes on and on and on. But eventually he says, and he focuses you on development of your own practice, that rather than giving all of that enormous offering, the thing that you could really do that's going to produce wholesome karma for you is practice the 5 precepts of abstaining from destruction of life, taking what is not given, sexual misconduct, false speech or lying, and then taking substances that cause heedlessness. Because by you doing this, this is going to cause less and less harm in the world. And this is one of the best gifts that you could ever give, is by not causing harm in the world. Then the second highest quality that he's talking about here is the development of loving kindness, practicing loving kindness meditation and developing loving kindness in the mind, which eliminates anger, hatred, and ill will, and all those lesser versions like frustration, agitation, annoyance, even the slightest dislike towards others. Because if you develop that, that's going to knock down your anger, which is going to knock down the harm that you're causing to other people. And it's going to knock down any kind of unwholesome karma that you're having to experience as part of creating that through your anger. So this is the second highest quality thing that you could do. With the highest quality thing, developing the perception of impermanence. And you accomplish this through breathing mindfulness meditation. This is the highest quality of karma that you could produce. Of course, you need to understand what the universal truth of impermanence is, but then cultivating that perception, meaning soaking that deeply in your mind so that you understand that the world around you is impermanent. This is ultimately going to lead you towards enlightenment, because what the unenlightened mind is doing is craving permanence. So if you can develop this understanding about the world, that the world around you is impermanent, this is really, really helpful for your practice and a really high quality of karma to be able to produce. So this is this particular chapter. If you guys have questions on it, you can let me know. The Buddha's giving you this higher and higher amount of wholesome karma that you could be creating through giving, and by giving people freedom from harm, from your own actions, through eliminating any of the 5 precepts that you might have been practicing, killing or stealing or sexual misconduct or lying or intoxicants. That's going to be really fruitful for you. Practicing loving kindness and cultivating that in the mind to eliminate anger, hatred, and ill will and all the lesser versions. And then practicing to the point where you understand impermanence. This is really going to help you to eliminate craving, desire, attachment, and ultimately get to enlightenment. So this is what the Buddha is really focusing you on in this particular discourse, that this is even more fruitful than giving, practicing of generosity. So does anybody have any questions on this? Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So we'll move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 32. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, we'll go to Yihang, and it looks like Vibha will be the one after that.
Thank you, Teacher David. A great gift. Monks here, a noble disciple, having abandoned the destruction of life, abstains from the destruction of life. By abstaining from the destruction of life, the noble disciple gives to an immeasurable number of beings freedom from fear, hostility, and harm. He himself, in return, enjoys immeasurable freedom from fear, hostility, and harm. This is the first gift, a great gift, highest of long-standing, traditional, ancient, untainted, and never before tainted, which is not being tainted and will not be tainted, not refused by wise ascetics and Brahmins. This is the stream of merit, stream of the wholesome nutriment of peacefulness, heavenly ripening peacefulness, conducive to heaven, that leads to what is aspired for, needed and agreeable to one's welfare and peacefulness. The other four precepts, which are abstaining from taking of what is not given, abstaining from sexual misconduct, abstaining from lying, and abstaining from consuming substances that causes heedlessness, are repeated with the Buddha's guidance. There are, monks, these 5 gifts, great gifts, highest of long-standing, traditional, ancient, untainted, and never before tainted, which are not being tainted and will not be tainted, not refused by wise ascetics and Brahmins. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yihang. So here the Buddha is once again saying there's this great gift that you can give to the world, and that is you practicing the elimination of harm to other beings. And he's here referring to the 5 precepts because that's a beginning teaching that household practitioners are going to work towards getting up and running for or with. And that's why this book is called The Foremost Householders, is because there's a collection of teachings here really geared toward household practitioners. And here, if you practice the elimination of taking life, taking what is not given, sexual misconduct, lying, and taking intoxicants, you're giving this immeasurable amount of freedom of fear, hostility, and harm to other beings because you're not causing harm to other beings. And as a result, there's this immeasurable freedom from fear, hostility, and harm that comes back to you. Because when you understand the natural law of karma and you know that you've been practicing for an extended period of time where you're not causing any harm to others through your speech, actions, and livelihood, you can be at peace. Your mind can more and more just rest and be at peace, where you don't have to be worried about your relationships with other people and what you said to one person versus what you said to another. So the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that this is what leads to peacefulness. That's what he's saying here when he says the nutriment of peacefulness and ripening in peacefulness, that you're going to need to practice those 5 precepts as a beginning teaching as you're getting up and running on the entire Eightfold Path, because the 5 precepts plug into the Eightfold Path. He is talking about here how practicing the 5 precepts is conducive to heaven, but it's always important to understand that that's not the goal of the teachings of the Buddha. He's just helping you to be able to see that if you fall short of enlightenment for any reason and you're practicing the teachings more and more closely, there's the potential to be reborn in this heavenly realm. But remember, that's not permanent. Those beings are still in the cycle of rebirth and they need to get to enlightenment. So while, yes, this is true that it's conducive to heaven by practicing the 5 precepts, that's not the ultimate goal of the teachings of the Buddha, but instead is to learn and practice and develop in order to get to enlightenment. So these 5 precepts leads to your welfare and peacefulness in this particular life. And the Buddha goes through and talks about all the 5 precepts in this way, that you're giving this great gift to the world and that it's not polluted, it's not tainted. In other words, that nobody could find fault in someone who's practicing these particular precepts. That if someone's like, oh, you're not killing, you should be killing, or, oh, you aren't stealing, you should be stealing. So if somebody's wise, they're a wise ascetic or Brahmin, they wouldn't refuse that, yes, these are indeed wise teachings, because they can see the clarity of them through the natural law of karma, that it's wise to not kill, steal, have sexual misconduct, to lie, or take intoxicants. So do you guys have questions on this particular chapter? Okay, it looks like we have a question coming in here. Okay, you're not asking a question there, sir or ma'am, in Facebook. It's important that if you would like to ask questions, to ask questions. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So I'm going to move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 33. Would someone like to volunteer to read this one? Okay, there's Vibhav. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, David. Malikas, to be reborn, graceful, rich, and influential. Malika, some woman is not prone to anger or often intense frustration. Even if she is criticized a lot, she does not lose her temper and become irritated, hostile, and stubborn. She does not display anger, hatred, and bitterness. And she gives things to ascetics or Brahmins, food and drink, clothing and vehicles, garlands, scents and ointments, bedding, dwellings, and lighting. And she is without jealousy. One who does not have jealousy, resent, or feel bitter about the gain, honor, respect, admiration, appreciation, and gratitude given to others. When she passes away from the state, if she comes back to this world, wherever she is born, she is beautiful, attractive, and graceful, possessing supreme beauty of complexion, rich, with great wealth and property, and influential. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So here, the Buddha is talking to a female, so he's talking in terms of female pronouns and things of that nature, but you can relate these teachings to any gender that's out there. So you can, substitute in any other genders here. So what the Buddha is saying here is that this individual, not being prone to anger, hatred, irritation, frustration, stubbornness, bitterness, things like this, and this individual is making offerings of food and drink and clothing and things like this. This is the whole reason why their mind isn't experiencing so much anger, because they're eliminating craving, desire, attachment. That's what's the cause of anger. And practicing generosity is training your mind to let go. So of course, somebody who's practicing generosity is going to have less of that in the mind, but there's still work for them to do. It's not just generosity that's going to lead to the elimination of discontent feelings, but also because of this generosity, not only do they have less anger, but there's also no jealousy there either, where someone's envious or jealous of other people. And what the Buddha is saying is, okay, when this individual passes away, if they're reborn, they come back into the world as beautiful, attractive, graceful, and so forth and so on. And this is the natural law of karma, of cause and effect. Not only can you understand this through this teaching of this is how somebody comes back into the world if they're going to be reborn, but also people who are born into this world and you see them and you're wondering, like, why are they so beautiful? Why are they so attractive? Why are they so rich and wealthy from birth? Well, this is the reason why, is in their previous life, they didn't have much anger. They practiced a certain amount of generosity. They didn't have jealousy. And that's what allows someone to then come back into the world with these particular qualities. So the Buddha is always helping you to be able to see this cause and effect, or action and result, keeping in mind that the ultimate goal isn't for rebirth. It's to train the mind to get to enlightenment and eliminate your discontentedness in this particular life. So does anybody have any questions on this chapter? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let's go to the next chapter. This is chapter 34. Looks like Pat's volunteering. Go ahead, sir.
One who respectfully gives timely food. Monks, when a donor gives food, he gives the recipients 4 things. What for? He gives life, beauty, peacefulness, and strength. Having given life, he receives of life, whether heavenly or human. Having given beauty, he receives of beauty, whether heavenly or human. Having given peacefulness, he receives of peacefulness, whether heavenly or human. Having given strength, he receives of strength, whether heavenly or human. Monks, when a donor gives food, he gives the recipients these 4 things. One who respectfully respectfully gives timely food to those mentally disciplined ones who eat what others give, provides them with four things: life, beauty, peacefulness, and strength. The man who gives life and beauty, who gives peacefulness and strength, will obtain long life and fame wherever he is reborn. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Pat. So here the Buddha is talking about giving gifts of timely food, meaning when somebody needs some food, you're there to help them and give them some food. And then by having given this food, you're giving life, beauty, peacefulness, and strength. And that's what's coming back to you in terms of the natural law of karma. Let me help you to understand how this works, because it's nothing mystical or magical. That what craving, desire, attachment is doing to the mind is you're holding on. And oftentimes with something like food, an individual might hoard food. We can think about like an animal, how an animal hoards food. This is because of their craving, desire, attachment. They aren't able to cultivate their mind to the point where they're willingly able to share food unless there's some kind of intervention. But typically animals will hoard food because of their craving, desire, attachment. And oftentimes human beings have those same kind of aspects, that they might hoard food or hoard other things because the mind has this craving where it's holding on to things. Well, if you're craving and you're holding on to things, there's this disgruntledness in the mind. There's this stress and anxiety that is in the mind. And because of this, you'll see that the mind has a shorter lifespan. You'll see that there's a lack of beauty, a lack of peacefulness, and a lack of strength. Because going around the world trying to get all your cravings fulfilled, you'll get exhausted by doing that. So when you have a lot of craving, desire, attachment in your mind, the selfishness is there, you're going to see that it's going to impact the mind, and therefore the mind is going to put strain on the body, and now the body is, and the organs in the body are going to experience these difficulties and struggles. If you've ever seen yourself when you're angry, no matter how beautiful or handsome you might look, typically you look really ugly when you're angry, right? You don't have this beauty because the mind's all angry and frustrated, right? Well, when you're giving offerings, when you're practicing generosity, the mind is being trained to let go. The mind is eliminating its craving, desire, attachment, the longing, the yearning, the holding on to things. And as a result of that, you will see that the mind has the ability to be more peaceful and joyful. And because of that, then you'll have more life, you'll have more beauty where you'll look more attractive, you'll have more peacefulness in the mind, you'll have more strength because you're not exhausted from trying to fulfill your cravings, desires, attachments. So that's how all of this is working. It's not anything mystical or magical that you instantly give a gift and wham, somebody's going to grant you this, long life or this beauty or peacefulness or strength. But instead, it's because the mind's eliminating craving, desire, attachment through the practice of generosity that now one experiences longer life, more beauty, peacefulness, and strength, either in this life or some future life. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular chapter. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So let's move on to the next chapter. This is chapter 35. Would someone like to read this one? Okay, Yihang, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. The entire holy life is wholesome friendship, wholesome companionship, wholesome comradeship. And how, Ananda, does a monk who has a wholesome friend, a wholesome companion, a wholesome comrade develop and cultivate the Noble Eightfold Path? Here, Ananda, a monk develops right view, which is based upon seclusion, freedom from strong feelings, and elimination, maturing in release. He develops right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, which is based upon seclusion, freedom from strong feelings, and elimination, maturing in release. It is in this way, Ananda, that a monk who has a wholesome friend, wholesome companion, a wholesome comrade, develops and cultivates the Noble Eightfold Path. By the following method too, Ananda, it may be understood how the entire holy life is wholesome friendship, wholesome companionship, wholesome comradeship, by replying upon me as a wholesome friend. Ananda, beings subject to birth are freed from birth. Beings subject to aging are freed from aging. Beings subject to illness are freed from illness. Beings subject to death are freed from death. Beings subject to sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair are freed from sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. By this method, Ananda, it may be understood how the entire holy life is wholesome friendship, wholesome companionship, wholesome comradeship. Thank you.
Okay. So for those of you guys that have studied any of the foundational programs and understanding the teachings of the Buddha, you know about this Eightfold Path, that this is the core central teaching of the Buddha, and all of his other teachings plug into it. The Eightfold Path is the path to enlightenment. You would need to know this inside and out, backwards and forwards, to even get on the path to enlightenment and make your way towards enlightenment and really make real progress. So what the Buddha is saying here is that for someone who's interested in developing the mind and getting to enlightenment, that this Eightfold Path is something that needs to be developed and cultivated, and that you would also cultivate relationships with wholesome friends and companions and comrades, because those individuals are into wholesome things, and your mind's going to lean in the direction of those wholesome things. Whereas if you've ever hung out with people who are into unwholesome things, like stealing or sexual misconduct or lying or substances that cause heedlessness, you know that your mind leaned in those directions. So if you cultivate people around you that are into those kinds of things, your mind's going to tend to lean in that direction. But if you're interested in getting to enlightenment, you would use the path to enlightenment as a way to help you to understand who would be wise for you to spend time with. Where even though you might have friends that you've been friends for a very long time, oftentimes what you're going to find is you're going to need to walk away from certain relationships in order to continue your journey on the path to enlightenment, that it doesn't necessarily make sense to stay in those relationships. And you can do this through discernment, where you're not judging other people and looking down on them. Like say you see someone's into drugs or intoxicants or things like this, you don't need to look down on them in a judgmental way, because that's only going to cause harm to your own mind. But you can use your discernment or wise decision making and realize that it's unwise for you to spend time with that individual and choose to move on from the relationship. And this will help you to cultivate more and more relationships where they're into wholesome things. And this is where you oftentimes see people in the Buddhist community becoming friends with each other and spending time with each other, because people are into wholesome things and cultivating their mind and developing their life. So the Buddha is teaching you that it would be wise to develop friends and companions that are into wholesome things. And not only in your personal life, it's helpful to understand this in your professional life too. Because if you're around individuals in your professional life that are into unwholesome things or corruption or scheming or things like this is going to hurt you in your day-to-day life as well. Remember, it's your decisions that's producing any particular results or karma in your life, and your decision to be friends with someone who is into unwholesome things is going to produce unwholesome karma. So that's why the Buddha is showing you and helping you to see that making the decision to associate with people into wholesome things is going to produce wholesome results or wholesome karma for you. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here. So we'll move to the next one, which is chapter 36. And it looks like Yusuf would like to read that one. And then Keely after that. Go ahead, Yusuf.
The cycle of rebirth without discoverable beginning for being hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. An eon is long, monk. It is not easy to count it and say it is so many years, or so many hundreds of years, or so many thousands of years, or so many hundreds of thousands of years. Suppose, monk, there was a great stone mountain, a yojana long, 12 to 15 kilometers, a yojana wide, and a yojana high, skipping the length, without holes or services, one solid mass of rock. At the end of every 100 years, a man would stroke it once with a piece of Cassian cloth. That great stone mountain might by this effort be worn away and eliminated, but the eon would still not have come to an end. So long as an eon, monk. Sorry. And of eons of such length we have wandered through so many eons, so many hundreds of eons, so many thousands of eons, so many hundreds of thousands of eons. For what reason? Because, monk, the cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not discerned of beings roaming and wandering unhindered by ignorance, unknown of true reality, and fettered by craving. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Yusuf. So here the Buddha is talking about this discoverable beginning of the cycle of rebirth, that it's undiscoverable. During the lifetime of the Buddha, the highest number that they could really count to is 100,000. So they had the 100,000th number established, but the word million in that particular volume of number wasn't actually available to them. So anything over like 999,999, they wouldn't have been able to count higher than that. So they were limited in what they were able to count to. So the Buddha described this immeasurable amount of time as an eon, where today we can count to millions and billions and trillions and even higher than that. So scientists share with us that the world, the earth, has been here for approximately 4.5 billion years. And some people have a little bit shorter, some people have a little bit longer, but that's kind of like the consensus, about 4.5 billion years. And that's what they currently think. And who knows, they might be one discovery away from changing that prediction entirely. But nonetheless, we're thinking that this world has started around that time. But an exact point or exact time that the world has actually started, we actually can't discern that because none of us were actually there. And we can't count to know, and we weren't there to know exactly how long the world has been here. And the Buddha is giving this example of how long an eon is, that there's this mountain that's 12 or 15 kilometers high and wide and long, and that if every 100 years you rubbed it with a piece of cloth, that mountain would have deteriorated, and then the eon still would not have ended. So this is the way of the Buddha basically talking about this immeasurable amount of time of an eon. And he's saying that each one of us have roamed and wandered through the world in the cycle of rebirth for an immeasurable number of eons, hundreds and many hundreds of thousands of eons, that there's just been countless rebirths over and over and over and over again. And for anybody who's observed their past lives, you know this to be true because there's just countless rebirths that are occurring prior to any birth that you're currently in. So the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that an actual time frame of when the cycle of rebirth started, it's undiscoverable. And if you have a craving to know that, you can just eliminate that from your mind and be like, hey, it's undiscoverable. You're never going to find out that information. Just let it go and move on. Focus on eliminating your cravings, desires, attachments within the mind. That's what's going to lead to enlightenment, not trying to figure out what's happened long in the past. So any questions here on this particular chapter? All right, looks like Yusuf has a question. Go ahead, sir.
So you said you can remember. So you said you did remember your or see your past lives. So it is a bunch of lists of past lives. What is the first thing you remember about your first life? Do you remember that?
I remember 2 human lives before this, and then countless animals before that. But the actual first life and which one was the first life in terms of, all these different births, even prior to the human birth, because that wasn't my very first birth, then, I can't discern and can't discover what was the actual first one.
Okay, understood.
Mm-hmm. All right, let me see if we have any other questions anywhere. All right, I don't see any others. So let's go on to the next chapter. This is chapter 37, another one to help you understand how long we've been roaming and wandering through the cycle of rebirth. So Keely, if you'd like to read that one, go ahead, ma'am.
The stream of shed tears in this cycle of rebirth is more than the water in the 4 great oceans. Good, monks. It is good that you understand the teachings taught by me in such a way. The stream of tears that you have shed as you roam and wandered through this long course, weeping and wailing because of being united with the disagreeable and separated from the agreeable. This alone is more than the water in the 4 great oceans. For a long time, monks, you have experienced the death of a mother. As you have experienced this, weeping and wailing because of being united with the disagreeable and separated from the agreeable. The stream of tears that you have shed is more than the water in the four great oceans. For a long time, monks, you have experienced the death of a father, the death of a brother, the death of a sister, the death of a son, the death of a daughter, the loss of relatives, the loss of wealth, loss through illness. As you have experienced this, weeping and wailing because of being united with the disagreeable and separated from the agreeable, the stream of tears that you have shed is more than the water in the four great oceans. For what reason? Because, monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. At first point is not discerned of beings roaming and wandering unhindered by ignorance, unknowing of true reality, unfettered by craving. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So here, the Buddha is helping you to be able to see a few things here. Is one, that the cycle of rebirth is just undiscoverable. It's not possible to understand it. But he's kind of factoring in here, helping you to be able to see this stream of tears that have been cried by being separated from the agreeable, meaning things that you crave and desire, and being united with the disagreeable, things that you're repulsed by. That this is going to cause the mind to be discontent. And there's all this weeping and crying and wailing. And all of those tears in all of our previous lives is more than the water of all the water and all the seas. So if you've ever done any scuba diving, you know anything about the water in the world, that there's been an extensive amount of water in the world, and that the Buddha is saying that's how much you've cried based on all these different things. But then the Buddha says, okay, the beginning of this cycle of rebirth, yes, it's undiscoverable, but if you focus on eliminating these pollutions of mind, instead of focusing on the beginning of the cycle of rebirth, it's enough to get to enlightenment. Essentially what he's saying is, hey, don't focus over here on trying to figure out when was the beginning of the cycle of rebirth. Instead, focus on getting to enlightenment, because eliminating craving, desire, attachment, and all the other pollutions in the mind, that's what's going to get you to enlightenment. And that's going to be more than enough for you. Your mind is going to be completely content and completely peaceful. You're not going to have any of this longing, yearning in the mind. So getting liberated from those strong feelings and discontentedness, that's what the real goal is. And that would be enough. No need to focus over here on the beginning of the cycle of rebirth. So let me know what questions you guys have on this particular chapter. This is really helping you to be able to see just how much you've been reborn over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. So it looks like Yusuf has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Is what the Buddha is saying that, like, for example, me, I have cried in my all lives an amount of tears that can fill the ocean?
Yes, he's saying that all the water and all the seas is representative of all the tears that you've cried in all your past lives.
So I have seen, for clearance, I mean, like, instead of believing this, for clearance, I have seen a documentary saying that if a human were to cry, he needs like millions of years. I don't remember the number exactly, but like millions or billions of years to be able to fill a river, not about an ocean. So how is this possible, to fill an ocean that is bigger than the river like 1,000 times?
Yeah,
Sorry, continue.
That's what the Buddha is explaining to you, is that you've been reborn so many countless times in the past over all this period of time that the cycle of rebirth has existed, that it equals more, those tears equal more than all the water and all the seas because of all the countless rebirths.
So I don't see what he's describing here as a true thing. I see it as an impossible thing. How to verify this?
Well, if someday you ever observe your past lives, you'll be able to verify this.
So you did verify this?
I can see and acknowledge all my past lives and how many countless past lives there were. So I know that the Buddha with 100% certainty is describing what exists, which is countless previous past lives.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, let me see if we have any other questions. All right, I don't see any other questions. So let's move on to the next chapter. This is chapter 38. Would someone like to read this? Okay, Yihang, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. Having experienced the same thing in this long course, monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not discerned of beings roaming and wandering, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. Whenever you see anyone in misfortune, in misery, you can conclude, we too have experienced the same thing in this long course. Whenever you see anyone happy and fortunate, you can conclude, we too have experienced the same thing in this long course. It is not easy, monks, to find a being who in this long course has not previously been your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your son, your daughter. For what reason? Because, monks, this cycle of rebirth is without discoverable beginning. A first point is not discerned of beings roaming and wandering unhindered by ignorance and fettered by craving. It is enough to experience fading away of strong feelings towards all conditions, enough to become free from strong feelings towards them, enough to be liberated from them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yihang. So here again, the Buddha is giving you some details to help you be able to see this long stretch of the cycle of rebirth and that you've been stuck in this continuous cycle of rebirth. This can be used for yourself as motivation to get out of this cycle of rebirth. If you see the problems in your life just reoccurring over and over and over again, this can help you to be able to see that. So you can just do the work you need to do to get out of this cycle of rebirth and not need to focus on when it started, but focus on purifying your mind to get out of this cycle of rebirth. This particular discourse, not only is it doing that, but it's providing you some other details that can actually help you on your journey to enlightenment. This part right here where the Buddha says, whenever you see someone experiencing misfortune or misery, you can conclude that you've experienced those same exact things. This can actually help you to cultivate compassion in your mind. Compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others. Sometimes an individual whose mind doesn't have compassion fully developed can turn kind of a blind eye to any misfortune that's going on in the world. But you can understand people's misfortune and you can understand that you experience that same misfortune. So this can help you to arise compassion in your mind so you can practice that mental quality. Now remember, compassion is a mental quality that you're practicing. It doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be an action behind it, but you need to cultivate that compassion in your mind as part of your journey to enlightenment and understanding that anything you see somebody experiencing now as a misfortune, you've experienced that same thing, can help you to arise that. So say, for example, you see someone who's homeless or lacking food or shelter or clothing, you can understand that you've experienced that exact same thing at some point in this long cycle of rebirth. And this can help you to have concern for their misfortune. The same thing here when you see that you understand that people are experiencing something fortunate. This can help you to arise sympathetic joy or joy for other success. Maybe you see someone rich or famous and wealthy and things like this, and you can remind yourself, even if you're not rich and wealthy right now, that at some point you've experienced that already. So this can help you to eliminate craving, desire, attachment for those things, but it can also help you to arise sympathetic joy where you have joy for others' success, even if you didn't contribute to it. Then the Buddha here is explaining how because you've been in this cycle of rebirth for so long, any beings that you come in contact with, this has previously been a relative of yours, either your mother, father, brother, sister, son, or daughter. So that mosquito that lands on you, instead of like, boom, whoa, there goes mom, right? You're not interested in that. It's like this being has been a relative of yours at some point. So you can just kind of blow it off or shoo it off with your hand. This will help you to cultivate loving kindness within your mind, that you have this genuine interest in seeing all beings be well. so that when you go out into the world, not only with insects and animals, that you treat them loving and kind, but human beings too. So when you go into a restaurant and there's a person that's a cashier or a food server, instead of treating them disrespectfully and unkind and in degrading ways, instead treat them as if they're a family member. And I don't know, maybe you don't treat your family members with love and care and kindness and respect, but that's what you would be wise to do with your family members. And then same thing with these individuals who are out in the world. Instead of viewing them as a stranger and holding on to that perception, which can drive a lot of fear and anxiety and stress when you go out into the world, instead develop the understanding that these are members of your family that you just haven't met yet. They've been family members of yours in a previous life. So instead of looking at everybody around you as a stranger and holding on to that perception, change your view and look at this individual as a relative. Here in Thailand, when we go out into the world, we actually talk to people as if they are our relatives. We will talk to that older, elderly woman behind the cashier. We will refer to her as grandmother, right? Or that gentleman that's sweeping the streets, we might refer to him as our uncle. Or that young food server who's in the restaurant trying to help us to get food, we might refer to this person as our younger brother or sister. And this is really helpful to be able to think this way when you go out into the world. So it takes you away from that perspective that everybody's a stranger, everybody's out to get you, everybody's wanting to do harm to you. Instead, just think of everybody as a family member. Then you can talk to everybody and anybody that you come in contact with. Hello, good morning. How are you, sir? Hello, ma'am. Good afternoon. How are you? Right? You can do these kinds of things. You can break through that wall of thinking that you have to be rough and hard and have this hard outer shell with the people around you. This is going to help you to get to enlightenment. So not only is the Buddha here giving you guidance that this cycle of rebirth doesn't have a discoverable beginning, but he's giving you other information about how to cultivate compassion, how to cultivate sympathetic joy and loving kindness, and allowing your mind to eliminate the unwholesome qualities and cultivate the wholesome. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular chapter. Okay, looks like Mayuli has a question. She says, teacher, going back to the previous chapter with the tears, did the Buddha refer to mainly human realm, as most realms don't shed tears that I'm aware of? I suspect that he's referring to all the realms that are able to shed tears, like the animal realm, as well as the human realm. I suspect animals are able to shed tears. You know, I've seen animals that have water coming down from their eyes, whether it's based in sadness or grief or despair, I'm not sure. But you know, he's referring to all realms that you would be able to cry in, not just the human realm. Okay, don't see any other questions anywhere. So now let's move on to the next chapter. This is chapter 39. Looks like Yusuf would like to read this one. Go ahead, sir.
In the agreeable and pleasurable world, this craving arises and establishes itself. The eye in the world is agreeable and pleasurable. The ear, the nose, the tongue, the body. The mind in the world is agreeable and pleasurable. This craving arises and establishes. The eye in the world is agreeable and pleasurable. The ear, the nose, the tongue, the body. The mind in the world is agreeable and pleasurable. And this craving comes to be abandoned. Its elimination comes about. Forms, sounds, odors, flavors, physical objects, mental objects, eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, mind consciousness, eye contact, ear contact, nose contact, tongue contact, body contact, mind contact, feeling born of eye contact, ear contact, nose contact, tongue contact, body contact, mind contact, the perception of forms, sounds, odors, flavors, physical objects, and of mental objects, volition, choices, and decisions in regard to forms, sounds, odors, flavors, physical objects, and mental objects, thinking of forms, sounds, odors, flavors, physical objects, and mental objects, pondering on forms, sounds, odors, flavors, physical objects, and mental objects, The craving for forms, sounds, odors, flavors, physical objects, and mental objects. For each of the above, in the world is agreeable and pleasurable, and there is craving arises and establishes itself. In the world is agreeable and pleasurable, and there this craving comes to be abandoned, there its elimination comes about.
Okay, thank you, Yusuf. So this is kind of a good primer for the next book. The next book is all about the 6 sense bases. And this is where you're learning that craving, desire, attachment that we talk about in all the other classes and courses and retreats, what it really comes down to is sensual desire, where the mind is longing, yearning through the 6 sense bases for agreeable contact. The mind is wanting everything to be pleasurable. So in terms of what you see or hear or smell or taste or anything that comes in contact with the body or any thoughts or ideas that go through the mind is longing, yearning, wanting these things to be pleasurable and agreeable. But because you live in an impermanent world, things can't be permanently agreeable and pleasurable. So as long as there's craving, desire, attachment in the mind, and you see things as agreeable and disagreeable, when you get the agreeable, you're going to get pleasant feelings. And when you have the disagreeable contact, you're going to get the painful feelings. So when you get rid of the craving, desire, attachment, the longing, yearning through these sense spaces, that's what's going to actually lead to your peacefulness and your joy in your day-to-day life. That's what leads to all the qualities of concentration and focus and clarity and deep memory and all the other qualities associated with enlightenment. So the Buddha is kind of helping to walk you through that just in kind of like a short way, but you're going to see a lot more detail on this when we get to volume 9, where he's going to really break it down into detail so that you understand what each one of these things are. Because there's the internal sense bases, which is what the Buddha is talking about up here, of the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. That's called the internal sense base. Then there's what's called the external sense bases, which are the forms. That's what the eye will see. Then the external sense base is the sound. That's what the ear will hear. Then there's the odor, flavors, physical objects, and mental objects. These are called external sense bases. So when the internal sense base and the external sense base, now with those two things, and then the mind has this contact, now there's this awareness or this consciousness that when you have the physical eye, when you have the external sense base of the form, and then the mind becomes aware of it, that's what's called eye consciousness, that the mind has now become aware of something that you see through the eye. And now we call those 3 things eye contact. That in order to have eye contact, there needs to be an eye, there needs to be a physical form, and then there needs to be awareness of that physical form. And those 3 things are what's called contact. And now when there's contact, that's where if there's craving in the mind, the feeling will arise in the mind. And that's where then one might form certain perceptions. Then one might form certain decisions that they make based on that. Then there's going to be certain thoughts or ideas in the consciousness or in the mind. And then ultimately the Buddha is helping you to be able to see that this is where craving, desire, attachment is formed. Because the mind's wanting things to be permanently agreeable and pleasurable when it's just not possible for this to occur. So let me know if you guys have questions on this. This is, like I mentioned, a good little warm-up or a primer for the next book. This is in the agreeable and pleasurable world, this craving arises and establishes itself. This is how it's occurring. Any questions here? You can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, we have a question here. Oh, that's still the individual hasn't realized that this is a place to ask questions, not to try to teach and give unsolicited guidance. So it's important that you ask questions. If you have questions, that's what's going to help you in your journey to enlightenment. And also not giving unsolicited guidance. That'll knock down your conceit and your ego, so you're not trying to step in and give people guidance and unsolicited advice. So I don't see any questions here. So we're going to move on to the next one, which is chapter 40. It looks like Pat would like to read that one. Go ahead, sir.
Transcending physical pain by avoiding mental pain. Monks, The uninstructed worldling feels a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, and a neither painful nor pleasant feeling. The instructed noble disciple, too, feels a pleasant feeling, a painful feeling, and a neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Therein, monks, what is the distinction, the disparity, the difference between the instructed noble disciple and the uninstructed worldling? Venerable Sir, our teachings are rooted in the perfectly enlightened one, guided by the perfectly enlightened one, taken refuge in the perfectly enlightened one. It would be good if the perfectly enlightened one would clear up the meaning of this statement. Having heard it from him, the monks will remember it. Then listen and attend closely, monks. I will speak. Yes, Venerable Sir, the monks replied. The perfectly enlightened one said this. Monks, when the uninstructed worldling is being contacted by a painful feeling, he sorrows, grieves, and has displeasure. He weeps, beating his breast, and becomes distraught. He feels two feelings, a bodily one and a mental one. Suppose they were to strike a man with a dart, and then they would strike him immediately afterwards with a second dart, so that the man would feel a feeling caused by two darts. So too, when the uninstructed worldling is being contacted by a painful feeling, he has two feelings, a bodily one and a mental one. Being contacted by that same painful feeling, he has aversion towards it. When he has aversion towards painful feelings, the underlying tendency to aversion towards painful feelings lies behind this. Being contacted by a painful feeling, he seeks excitement in sensual pleasure. For what reason? Because the uninstructed worldling does not know of any escape from painful feelings other than sensual pleasure. When he seeks excitement in sensual pleasure, the underlying tendency to crave for pleasant feelings lies behind this. He does not understand as it really is the cause and disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of these feelings. When he does not understand these things, the underlying tendency to ignorance in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feelings lies behind this. If he feels a pleasant feeling, he feels it attached. If he feels the painful feeling, he feels it attached. If he feels a neither painful nor pleasant feeling, he feels it attached. This, monks, is called an uninstructed worldling who is attached to birth, aging, and death, who is attached to sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, who is attached to discontentedness, I say.
Pat, can I stop
Monks.
you there for a second?
Sure.
I'd like to just help everybody to understand what's being discussed so far, so then you'll understand the next part even more. So here, the Buddha is talking about an uninstructed worldling. What he's talking about here is an individual who's a non-practitioner of these teachings. He would refer to them as an uninstructed worldling because they're holding on to the world and they're uninstructed. They have no training whatsoever. And what he's describing is that when somebody experiences a bodily painful thing, like say you stump your toe, in this situation, you're going to feel two feelings. You're going to feel the bodily one, which is the physical pain, and you're going to feel the mental one, which is the mental anguish that goes along with it. And he's saying that this is like getting hit with two darts, that there's the first dart, which is the bodily sensation, the physical sensation, and then there's the second dart, which is the mental one or the mental anguish that goes along with that. And then now being contacted by this painful feeling, meaning you stump your toe, the mind has an aversion to it in the untrained mind, meaning it's pushing it away, that there's this underlying tendency to have aversion towards painful things. And now, because the mind has experienced this painful feeling, the mind now seeks excitement in sensual pleasures, meaning that the mind now craves for that permanent comfort of the body. So that first thing that you feel is the physical sensation of stumping your toe. Ow, that hurts. But now, because the mind craves permanent comfort and it's having this excitement and sensual pleasures, there's this mental anguish that heightens the physical pain and makes it even worse. So because the uninstructed worldling doesn't know the escape from these painful feelings, meaning the Eightfold Path and eliminating craving, desire, attachment, then the only thing that the uninstructed worldling knows how to do is seek sensual pleasures. So this is why somebody, when they come home from a hard day at work and they're feeling grumpy and miserable, they'll turn to alcohol or gambling or sex or shopping or some other thing like this. Because when they're down in those painful feelings, those uncomfortable feelings, the only thing that the mind knows how to do is crave something in order to get back to something that's somewhat manageable or comfortable. And because this individual seeks excitement or sensual pleasure, because the mind continues to crave for pleasantness, now it's going to actually cause the mind to experience more pain because the mind is actually craving this permanent comfort. And this is coming from this mind of this underlying ignorance or this lack of wisdom that the mind has. That because it doesn't understand the Eightfold Path and all these different aspects of the path, then the mind continues to long and yearn and stay stuck in this continuous cycle. That the mind doesn't understand the disappearance of this physical pain, that it is impermanent, it will be eliminated, that there's this gratification where the mind is longing, yearning with sensual desire, that there's this danger that the mind can crave and desire and is going to continue to experience this discontentedness, and that there's an escape. The mind in the unenlightened state and the untrained state doesn't understand the Eightfold Path, and that there's an escape out of these discontent feelings. So because the mind experiences discontentedness, it's experiencing these feelings attached. That when the mind experiences happiness, excitement, elation, and other feelings like this, the mind clings to it in the untrained mind. Or when the mind experiences the painful feeling, the mind clings to it and just thinks this is going to last for so long, or those neither painful nor pleasant feelings. So the mind in the unenlightened state, when it's untrained, it's holding on to this life, this birth, this aging, this death. And that's why it keeps experiencing sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair. So the whole discontentedness is continuing over and over and over again. And the mind is experiencing a heightened level of physical pain because of this mental anguish that's coming in. And the only reason why the mental anguish is coming in is because of the craving, desire, attachment, that the mind longing for permanent comfort of the body. And it doesn't understand that it just can't get that it's just not possible. Even as an enlightened being, you're still going to experience pain of the physical body sometimes. But the difference is you're not going to experience the mental anguish. And that's what Pat's going to read here with the instructed noble disciple.
Thank you. Monks, when the instructed noble disciple is contacted by a painful feeling, he does not sorrow, grieve, or have displeasure. He does not weep, beating his breast and become distraught. He feels one feeling, a bodily one, not a mental one. Suppose they were to strike a man with a dart, but they would not strike him immediately afterwards with the second dart, so that the man would feel a feeling caused by one dart only. So too, when the instructed noble disciple is contacted by a painful feeling, he feels one feeling, a bodily one, not a mental one. Being contacted by that same painful feeling, he has no aversion towards it. Since he has no aversion towards painful feelings, the underlying tendency to aversion towards painful feelings does not lie behind this. Being contacted by a painful feeling, he does not seek excitement in sensual pleasure. For what reason? Because the instructed noble disciple knows of an escape from painful feelings other than sensual pleasure. Since he does not seek excitement in sensual pleasure, the underlying tendency to crave for pleasant feelings does not lie behind this. He understands as it really is the cause and the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape in the case of these feelings. Since he understands these things, the underlying tendency to ignorance in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feelings does not lie behind this. If he feels a pleasant feeling, he feels it detached. If he feels a painful feeling, he feels it detached. If he feels neither painful nor pleasure nor pleasant feeling, he feels it detached. This, monks, is called a noble disciple who is detached from birth, aging, and death, who is detached from sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, who is detached from discontentedness, I say. This, monks, is the distinction, the disparity, the difference between the instructed noble disciple and the uninstructed worldling. The wise one, learned, does not feel the pleasant and painful mental feeling. This is the great difference between the wise one and the worldling. For the learned one who has comprehended the teachings, who clearly sees this world and the next, desirable things do not provoke his mind. Towards the undesired, he has no aversion. For him, attraction and repulsion no longer exist. Both have been extinguished, brought to an end. Having known the dust-free, sorrowless state, the transcender of existence rightly understands. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pat. Well done. So this discourse is one of the ones that I find to be really helpful for students to understand what it is that you're working towards as an instructed practitioner on the path to enlightenment, that you're guided towards the elimination of this craving and clinging, where the mind can get to a point where there's complete peace and joy in the mind. That when you experience as an instructed noble disciple or a well-developed practitioner on your journey to enlightenment, if you experience the toe being hit into a piece of furniture, you understand that that is impermanent. It's going to be over in a matter of time, and that the last thing you're interested in doing is craving permanent comfort of the body, because that's just going to arise mental anguish in the mind. You would like to instead understand that, this is impermanence. The body is not going to experience permanent comfort. And now you won't experience that mental anguish. You'll still experience some physical pain, but it won't be to the level that somebody would experience it if they weren't instructed and guided on this path. Because there's no aversion to this physical pain, then you're not going to long and yearn and seek sensual pleasures through craving, desire, attachment, because you have the wisdom to understand that there is an escape from all of this, that your mind has the wisdom to understand that it's not experiencing this lack of wisdom that the mind has as part of being untrained. And now, as you're making your way to enlightenment, if you experience a conditioned pleasant feeling, you need to not cling to it. That's what it means by he feels it detached. That, okay, if you notice conditional pleasant feelings arising, you know not to cling to it, that it's not permanent and it's not going to lead to permanent happiness or joy. And if you experience a painful feeling, same thing, you don't cling to it, or neither painful nor pleasant feeling, that you don't cling to it. And now, having eliminated craving and clinging to these things, the mind is now experiencing the things that the Buddha is talking about here, that the wise one has learned, and they don't feel these conditioned pleasant feelings and painful feelings, that mental feeling is no longer there because you're not having conditional experiences any longer. That the wise one is experiencing this because this individual has comprehended the teachings, and desirable things don't produce craving in your mind. It doesn't provoke your mind to long and yearn for it. And undesirable things, the mind has no aversion towards it, that you don't push it away. So because there's no more attraction and repulsion no longer existing in the mind, they've been extinguished or brought to an end, that now the mind is cleaned up, it's purified, or what the Buddha is calling here dust-free, that there's this sorrowless state, meaning that you're no longer going to experience any sorrow. And the mind has transcended all of this existence, continuing to be reborn over and over and over again. So let me know if you guys have questions here. I've described this before for you guys when people ask me about how an enlightened being experiences physical pain, but here you have it in the words of the Buddha in a very detailed way that's helping you to be able to understand. So if you have questions, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Yusuf has a question. Go ahead, sir.
I heard that the Buddha said that an enlightened being, if someone were to cut his 4 limbs, he would still have loving kindness for that being, right?
That's true, yes.
So will that enlightened being be lost in his pain, or he will still think, oh, this being is wise and may he be well, or something, like have those thoughts of loving kindness for him, or he will be lost in his pain?
Having physical pain doesn't mean that you're lost in that. As an enlightened being, if you have physical pain, you know you have physical pain, but the mind can still maintain its mental qualities of loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity, calmness and composure. So the way that you experience physical pain is the way that you've always known it, but an enlightened being isn't going to experience physical pain in the way that you currently experience it. that their mind is not going to be shaken up by that physical pain.
That's funny. Like even if his 4 limbs was cut, he would still have his mental equality.
Yeah, when you experience enlightenment and you experience physical pain as an enlightened being, you'll be able to see that truth for yourself.
Okay.
All right. So Mayuli has a question here. She says, "Teacher, I'm noticing with most contact through the internal and external sense bases, this mind often forms perceptions and sometimes judgments, but this mind is often able to cut it off right away. Does this mean that it is not yet mental object?" So the mental objects in the mind, those are the 10 fetters. So you'll have those mental objects until you uproot them. But what you're not interested in doing is feeding those mental objects, because you need to break those mental objects up and get them out of the mind. But you're trying to cut off and let go at the bodily sensations anytime conditioned feelings are arising, so that you're not feeding those further. What you're talking about here, this is a mind that's being diligent. It's not being complacent. That when you notice that the mind is trying to form a perception or judgment of others, you're cutting that off and letting it go. And that's what you would like to do. So you're no longer you're no longer feeding these mental objects. And that's what's going to ultimately help you to be able to uproot them and eliminate them out of the mind by doing that, but then also doing all the other work to eliminate the deeply rooted mental objects that are in the mind. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions anywhere. This last chapter that we have, this is the Eightfold Path. And whenever we get to this in this Pali Canon English study group, I just open up to see if there's any questions that you guys have, because you guys have learned this throughout the various programs and classes and courses and retreats. And it's important that you know it inside and out, backwards and forward. So it shows up here where you guys can learn it kind of refresh your memory from what you've learned in all the other classes. So I just open up to see if you guys have any questions on the Eightfold Path whenever we encounter it in this Pali Canon and English study group. So you can put your questions in Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Yusuf, you have a question?
Am I to read or to ask a question here?
I guess you weren't listening. I was saying that we don't read this one as part of the Pali Canon and English study group.
Is impermanence related to this? Can I ask about impermanence?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, so everything is constantly changing and it's gonna fade away. That is something I understand, but there is something about impermanence I don't understand, which is once there is a student of yours who made a book in their own language, I think Mexican, France, I don't remember the language. So I told you, what do you think? There might be some errors in that book. So you said, well, it is impermanence here. So what is the relation between impermanence and errors? Okay, everything's constantly changing, but I can have a book without any error or grammar or something.
Okay, so I don't understand your question, because what you're describing is impermanence, that an era is an impermanence.
So when I told you that this book could have an error, you said, okay, it's impermanence, but there are books that I can make maybe a book without any error. So what is the relation between like impermanence, that everything is constantly changing, and a book having an error? Because is my question clear?
There's no relation, because impermanence is describing to you that books are going to have errors, that not every book is going to be error-free. It's just not possible.
Oh, so this is what you meant. Oh, yeah, now I understand.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. So let me see if there's any other questions anywhere. So I don't see any other questions anywhere. So I'm just going to end class here by thanking all of you guys. Thank you for those of you guys that read. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your interest to continue to learn and grow on the path to enlightenment. Next week in this particular program, I'm going to be in volume 9, chapters 1 through 10. This is the volume that is all geared towards the 6 sense bases. This is where you're going to really dive in to start understanding central desire. So you can read those chapters either before class or after class, or maybe both times. We're going to study them here in class, but you have the words of the Buddha, you have words from me to be able to help you to integrate it into your day-to-day life. And this is where you're going to get the most benefit. Where if you don't have time to read the books, of course, if you can come to class, you're going to gain something from that. But if you do read before class and or after class, this is where you're going to get the best results. So next week, we're going to be studying that. Tomorrow in our group learning program, I'm going to be in Volume 1, Chapter 19, which is titled The Difficult Human Existence, Sickness, Aging, and Death. This is where I'm going to share the life story of the Buddha and helping you to understand these 3 impactful times of sickness, aging, and death so that you can overcome those where oftentimes the mind is experiencing a lot of difficulties and struggles during those time frames, either for yourself or for the people around you that are close to you. But it doesn't have to be that way. You can actually experience peace and joy even when you're experiencing sickness, aging, and death. So if you'd like to attend that, you're more than welcome to. And then, of course, on Wednesday, I'll be doing meditation with students and opening up to any and all questions that you have. So thank you again for attending, and perhaps we'll see you guys in a future class. Be well and take care. Sawadee-khap.
Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.